My husband kissed my forehead, promising our future would change after his trip to San Jose. I buried my face in his chest, crying so hard my body shook. But the second he disappeared through the security gate at Phoenix Sky Harbor, my tears stopped. I pulled out my phone and sent one email to my lawyer: freeze the $1.2 million LLC fund and permanently lock the Sedona Ranch deed. The most ruthless divorce of his life. Started with a goodbye kiss. To understand how I ended up making that call from the airport terminal, you have to understand the desert. Sedona, Arizona. It is a place of harsh beauty. Red rock canyons, an endless sun. That land meant everything to me. It was a sprawling, untamed property left to me by my grandfather. I didn't just want to live there. I wanted to build something meaningful, an eco-resort, and a true sanctuary. That is where Julian came in. We had been married for 2 years when we officially formed our LLC. I was the creator, the dreamer, the one covered in dust, sketching blueprints and managing the construction crews under the blazing heat. Julian was the businessman. He wore the sharp suits, carried the leather briefcase, and spoke in a language of profit margins and venture capital. It felt like the perfect partnership. I brought the legacy and the vision, and he brought the financial strategy. He made it sound so romantic, so protective. "Elena, let me handle the numbers," he would say, pouring me a glass of wine after a long day. "You focus on your art, on the design. Let us put everything into the company accounts, consolidate it all. I will take care of the stress so you do not have to." I agreed. Of course I agreed. Yeah, when you love someone, you want to build a united front. But looking back, I realize society teaches us to look out for physical bruises. We are told to run when someone raises a hand, but no one warns you about the other kind of violence: economic abuse. It does not leave scars on your skin, but it clips your wings just as permanently. By handing over the legal authority, the company's seal, and the financial accounts, I thought I was showing absolute trust in our marriage. In reality, I was handing him the kill switch to my own life. I had no separate savings, no private safety net. Every ounce of equity in my grandfather's land, every dollar my designs would eventually bring in, was locked behind passwords only Julian knew. He called it financial synergy. I called it being a supportive wife. Think about it. And if a day ever came when the trust shattered, I would not even have the money to hire a lawyer, let alone keep the roof over my head. He knew that. A manipulator always knows that. By controlling the finances, they quietly, meticulously erase all your exit routes. But I did not see the cage, because the bars were painted gold. On the surface, we were the ultimate power couple of Sedona. We hosted local investors at our half-finished resort, drank expensive champagne under the desert stars, and toasted to our brilliant future. He played the part of the devoted, hard-working CEO flawlessly. I was so busy building our dream that I never stopped to check if my name was still on the foundation. I trusted him blindly. I trusted our shared vision, until the desert wind finally blew away the top layer of his lies. And it happened 3 days before his flight to San Jose. Julian had left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I only meant to close his open browser. But a notification dropped down from the top of the screen, a text from Victoria. She was the prominent venture capitalist we had been courting for months. At least, that was the story. The message didn't mention term sheets or equity. It said, "I am looking at houses in Atherton right now, darling. Have you got her to sign the tax forms yet?" My heart stopped. I clicked the notification, my fingers trembling, and my entire reality unraveled. I scrolled up, reading month after month of messages, photos of them intertwined at luxury hotels, wire transfer receipts to an offshore account. Julian wasn't going to Silicon Valley to pitch our eco-resort. He was moving there with Victoria. And the most terrifying part was their actual business plan. Victoria wasn't an investor. She was his mistress, and her supposed firm was nothing but a shell company. Julian's reply to her read, "Just be patient. I will tell Elena they are standard LLC tax renewals. Once she signs the deed transfer, the ranch is ours to liquidate. We will have millions to start our real life. The room spun. 5 years of marriage, my grandfather's land, every drop of sweat I poured into our business. It was all a meticulously executed scam. He wasn't just leaving me. He was going to strip me of my heritage and leave me in ruins. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash his iPad against the granite counter and watch it shatter. I felt a physical pain in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, I heard his heavy footsteps coming down the hall. I locked the screen. I set the device down exactly where I found it, grabbed my coffee mug, and turned around. Julian walked into the kitchen, adjusting his tie, and kissed my cheek casually. "Morning, beautiful. Did you sleep well?" I fought back the bile rising in my throat. I smiled. "I slept perfectly," I said quietly. In that fraction of a second, I realized something crucial. Confronting him now would be emotional suicide. If I cried, if I made a scene, he would panic and accelerate his plan. I had to let him think he was the smartest man in the room. He thought I was just a blind, trusting artist who didn't understand finance. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you corner a woman in the desert. Corner a woman in the desert. It happened 3 days before his flight to San Jose. My Julian had left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I only meant to close his open browser, but a notification dropped down from the top of the screen. A text from Victoria. She was the prominent venture capitalist we had been courting for months. At least that was the story. The message didn't mention term sheets or equity. It said, "I am looking at houses in Atherton right now, darling. Have you got her to sign the tax forms yet?" My heart stopped. I clicked the notification, my fingers trembling, and my entire reality unraveled. I scrolled up, reading month after month of messages, photos of them intertwined at luxury hotels, wire transfer receipts to an offshore account. Julian wasn't going to Silicon Valley to pitch our eco-resort. He was moving there, with Victoria. No, and the most terrifying part was their actual business plan. Victoria wasn't an investor. She was his mistress, and her supposed firm was nothing but a shell company. Julian's reply to her read, "Just be patient. I will tell Elena they are standard LLC tax renewals. Once she signs the deed transfer, the ranch is ours to liquidate. We will have millions to start our real life." The room spun. 5 years of marriage. My grandfather's land. Every drop of sweat I poured into our business. It was all a meticulously executed scam. He wasn't just leaving me. He was going to strip me of my heritage and leave me in ruins. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash his iPad against the granite counter and watch it shatter. I felt a physical pain in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, I heard his heavy footsteps coming down the hall. I locked the screen. I set the device down exactly where I found it, grabbed my coffee mug, and turned around. Julian walked into the kitchen, adjusting his tie, and kissed my cheek casually. "Morning, beautiful. Did you sleep well?" I fought back the bile rising in my throat. I smiled. "I slept perfectly," I said quietly. In that fraction of a second, I realized something crucial. Confronting him now would be emotional suicide. If I cried, if I made a scene, he would panic and accelerate his plan. I had to let him think he was the smartest man in the room. He thought I was just a blind, trusting artist who didn't understand finance. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you corner a woman in the desert. That night, I lay perfectly still in the dark. The moonlight spilled across the bed sheets, illuminating Julian's face. And he was fast asleep, breathing softly, looking completely at peace. The man I had loved, the man I had promised my life to, felt like a complete stranger. A predator resting right beside me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to wake him up, to drag him out of bed, throw the evidence in his face, and demand the truth. I wanted to see the panic in his eyes. I wanted to tear down the facade, but I couldn't. I forced myself to stare at the ceiling, gripping the blanket until my knuckles turned white, and just breathe, slowly, carefully. I knew that if I confronted him right then, I would lose everything. This was not just a cheating husband, this was a corporate takeover. Julian was the CEO of our LLC. He held the legal authority, the passwords, the banking tokens, the company seal. If he knew I was onto him, he wouldn't apologize. And he would panic, and he would act. He could drain the $1.2 million fund in seconds. He could forge my signature and sign the ranch away to Victoria's shell company before the sun even came up. Crying and screaming wouldn't save my grandfather's land. A confrontation would only hand his mistress the keys to my kingdom. I had to be smarter. I had to be colder than him. In the chilling quiet of the bedroom, I replayed the conversation we had just a week ago, the night he announced his long-term fundraising trip to Silicon Valley. I had held his hand, my heart breaking at the thought of the distance. "Julian, I can come with you," I had pleaded. "I can manage the construction crews remotely. We can rent a small place in San Jose. I just don't want us to be apart for that long." But Julian, he was a master of manipulation, and he knew exactly what buttons to push, exactly how to play my deepest insecurities. He had stroked my hair, looking deeply into my eyes with such fake, practiced tenderness. "Elena, you know the investors need to see a working prototype," he had said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "If you leave Sedona now, the contractors will slack off. The project will stall. I cannot be out there securing millions in capital if the foundation here is crumbling. You are the soul of this resort. I need you here, protecting our legacy. This separation, it is a huge sacrifice, but it is necessary for our future." It sounded so noble, so logical. He wrapped his betrayal in the beautiful language of teamwork and sacrifice. He made me feel like I was the hero of our story, staying behind in the harsh desert to guard the fort. And he made me feel like demanding to go with him would be incredibly selfish, that I would be the one ruining our dream. He used my passion, my loyalty, and my deep love for my grandfather's land to build the very cage he was trapping me in. And I had walked right into it, nodding, wiping away my tears, agreeing to work myself to the bone under the Arizona sun while he planned to steal everything I owned. Lying there in the dark, the crushing pain slowly hardened into something else. The betrayal was a knife in my chest, but the realization of how deeply, how effortlessly he had played me, that ignited a fire. I listened to his steady breathing. He thought I was his naive, artistic wife, too busy with architectural blueprints and dusty boots to understand offshore bank statements. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. We'll let him think that. Tomorrow, I would wake up and make his coffee. I would go to the construction site and smile at the workers. I would pack his expensive suits into his suitcase. I would play the perfect, supportive, clueless partner. But the woman he married, she died that night in that bed. The woman lying next to him now was just waiting for the sun to rise. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even hit the red rocks of Sedona. I made coffee. I packed Julian's briefcase. I smiled when he kissed me goodbye before heading out to meet the contractors. The second his truck pulled out of the driveway, the performance ended. I went straight to my home office and locked the door. I didn't call a marriage counselor. I called the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in Phoenix. I didn't just need a divorce lawyer. And I needed a team that understood business fraud, asset freezing, and LLC restructuring. For the next 3 days, I lived 2 completely different lives. By day, I was the supportive, artistic wife, checking paint samples and reviewing landscape designs. But the moment Julian was asleep or out of the house, I became an investigator. I used the saved passwords on our shared desktop to bypass his security. I downloaded years of bank statements, LLC formation documents, and tax filings. I took high-resolution screenshots of every message, every wire transfer to Victoria's offshore accounts, every blueprint of their betrayal. I compiled it all onto a secure, encrypted drive. There is a concept in psychology called the sunk cost fallacy. It explains why so many women discover their husbands are cheating, or lying, or stealing. And yet, they stay. They tell themselves, I gave him my youth. We built this life for 5 years. I poured my sweat into this house. If I walk away now, I lose it all. They let the heavy, suffocating weight of the past chain them to a miserable future. I could have fallen into that exact same trap. I could have looked at our resort, the land my grandfather left me, the 5 years of my marriage, and decided it was just too much to throw away. But looking at those bank transfers, a cold, hard truth washed over me. Those 5 years were a failed investment. Julian was a toxic asset, and the only way to survive a bad investment is to cut your losses immediately. I refused to sacrifice the next 50 years of my life just because I spent the last 5 making a mistake. I wasn't going to cry over spilled milk. I wasn't going to beg a thief to love me. I was going to take back exactly what was mine. Daring to walk away when you have so much to lose, that is not heartless. That is the ultimate act of self-preservation. I handed the encrypted drive over to my legal team. The fraud, the embezzlement, the adultery. My lead attorney reviewed the files in utter silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp. We have him, she said, but we need to act before he boards that plane to San Jose or those funds will vanish forever. I already knew Julian's timeline. He needed my signature to liquidate the ranch. He was going to slip the property transfer documents into a stack of routine LLC tax renewals, hoping I would just blindly sign them like I always did. He thought I was still his obedient, clueless partner, and he had no idea that the woman he was trying to ruin had already rewritten the ending to his perfect little plan. The morning of his flight, the house smelled of fresh espresso and expensive cologne. Julian was pacing around the kitchen, checking his watch, acting like a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Elena, I need you to sign these before I head to the airport, he said, dropping a thick blue folder onto the marble counter. Just the routine quarterly tax filings and LLC compliance forms. The accountants need them submitted by Friday. I looked at the folder. I knew exactly what was inside. My lawyers had already warned me about this exact tactic. Hidden somewhere around page 40, buried under pages of dense legal jargon, or was the authorization to liquidate our company assets and transfer the deed of the Sedona Ranch to Victoria's Shell Corporation. I picked up the folder, my hands perfectly steady. Sure, I said softly. Let me just grab a pen from my office. You go make sure your suit is packed properly. I walked down the hall and closed my office door. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. I opened his folder, pulled out the thick stack of papers, and fed them straight into the paper shredder. I watched his meticulously planned scam turn into tiny, meaningless strips of confetti. Then, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an identical blue folder. My legal team had been working around the clock to draft this. You see, in a marriage where a business is involved, a divorce is not just a breakup. It is a corporate dissolution. Under the bylaws of our LLC, as the primary equity holder who contributed the physical land, I had the right to call an emergency restructuring if there was documented evidence of financial misconduct. And thanks to my midnight investigations, I had mountains of it. The documents in my new folder looked exactly like his. Same font, same formatting, same little yellow sticky notes pointing to the signature lines. But the words were completely different. Instead of authorizing a sale, the papers I held formally revoked Julian's title as CEO. They completely dissolved his access to our joint operating accounts, flagged his recent offshore wire transfers as fraudulent, and legally insulated my grandfather's land from any of his future debts. I took a deep breath, uncapped my pen, and signed my name on the bottom line. It felt like breaking free from a heavy, suffocating chain. I walked back into the kitchen just as Julian was zipping up his leather carry-on. I handed him the folder. All done. I said, managing a sweet, unsuspecting smile. Oh, wait. You missed a spot on the administrative addendum. You need to countersign right here as the operating manager. I handed him the pen. My pulse hammered in my throat. If he turned the page, if he took even 10 seconds to read the bold print at the top of the document, it would all be over. He would see the words, revocation of executive authority. He would know I knew everything. But arrogance is a beautiful blindfold. He glanced at the clock on the stove. He was running late for his flight. He didn't read the header. He didn't check the fine print. Though he just saw my signature, assumed he had won, and quickly scribbled his name right where I pointed. Perfect, he said, letting out a heavy sigh of relief. He slid the folder into his briefcase and patted it gently. Thanks, Elena. This will keep everything running smoothly while I am gone. I know it will, I replied. He pulled me into a tight hug. I breathed in his scent one last time, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hard clarity. He thought he was walking out of this house with the keys to a multi-million-dollar payout. He thought he had successfully stolen my past, my present, and my future. He had no idea that he was carrying his own corporate execution, legally binding, officially notarized, and signed by his own hand. I watched him load his bags into the waiting car. So he waved at me from the window as it pulled away down the dusty desert road. I didn't wave back. I just turned around, walked back into my kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The air in the house suddenly felt so incredibly light. 3 hours later. The desert sun was climbing high, casting long, sharp shadows across the Sedona landscape. I was sitting at my mahogany desk in the home office, looking out at the red rocks through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A cup of chamomile tea rested in my hands, perfectly warm. The house was entirely silent. The frantic heartbeat, the crushing anxiety, the suffocating grief from the past few days. It was all gone, evaporated, replaced by a cold, mathematical precision. I had set the trap. The lock had clicked. Now I was just waiting for the phone to ring. At exactly 1:15 p.m., the screen lit up. It was him. Julian's face, smiling in his contact photo, flashed against the glass. I took a slow sip of my tea, cleared my throat to ensure my voice was perfectly steady, and answered the call. "Hey, beautiful." Julian's voice came through the speaker, dripping with that practiced, effortless charm. I just landed in San Jose. The flight was a bit bumpy, but I am grabbing my bags and heading to the hotel now. God, I miss you already. Did everything go okay with the contractors this morning? I didn't answer his question. I didn't return his fake affection. I just let the silence hang on the line. The seconds ticked by, heavy and deliberate. Elena? You there? The charm in his voice faltered slightly. You sound quiet? Are you crying again? No, Julian, I said, my tone completely flat. I am not crying. Actually, I'm looking at a copy of the document you signed this morning. Oh, the tax renewals? He chuckled, sounding relieved. Yeah, just keep them safe. I'll send them over to the accountants once I get settled. They weren't tax renewals, Julian. The line went dead quiet. The faint background noise of the San Jose airport terminal seemed to vanish completely. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the sudden spike of adrenaline hitting his veins. What do you mean? He asked, his voice dropping an octave. I shredded your blue folder right after you went to pack your suit, I explained, articulating every single word with absolute clarity. The paper you countersigned on the kitchen island was a legally binding revocation of executive authority. I filed it with the state an hour ago. As of this morning, you are no longer the CEO of our LLC. You have 0 legal rights to this company, 0 rights to my grandfather's land, and 0 access to our operating accounts. What? Elena, what the hell are you talking about? Is this some kind of sick joke? I know about Victoria. I dropped the name like an anvil. I know about the Atherton house. I continued relentlessly. I know about the offshore wire transfers. I have downloaded every message, every receipt, every single piece of evidence of your corporate fraud and your little affair. Elena, listen to me. Let me explain. There is nothing to explain. I cut him off, my voice sharp as broken glass. The $1.2 million LLC fund was frozen by a court order exactly 40 minutes ago. You cannot withdraw a single cent. And while you were flying over Nevada, dreaming about stealing my heritage, my lawyers officially filed for a contested divorce. You are going to be served with the papers at your hotel by the end of the day. The mask completely fell off. The loving, supportive husband vanished, replaced by the cornered predator I always knew was hiding underneath. "Are you insane?" Julian screamed into the phone. "You can't do this. I built that company with you. Half of everything is mine. You cannot just lock me out of my own life." "You tried to steal my family's legacy, Julian," I replied, utterly unmoved by his rage. "You tried to forge a property transfer and leave me bankrupt in the desert. You thought I was just some naive artist you could manipulate. But you forgot one very important thing. I own the land. I hold the majority equity. And you just voluntarily signed away your only leverage because you were too arrogant to read the fine print. You will pay for this, Elena," he threatened, his voice trembling with fury. "I will drag this out in court for years. I will ruin you." "With what money, Julian?" I asked softly. "Your personal accounts are tied to the fraudulent shell company you set up with Victoria. The authorities are going to be very interested in those offshore transfers. Good luck explaining that to a judge." He didn't have a response. There was only the sound of his ragged, panicked breathing. For 5 years, he had controlled every aspect of my life. He had pulled the strings, managed the money, and dictated my future. And in one single phone call, I had stripped him of every weapon he had. Goodbye, Julian. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed end. I set the device face down on the mahogany desk, leaned back in my leather chair, and picked up my tea. The desert outside looked more beautiful than it had in years. I took another sip. I was finally free. I didn't hear from Julian for 3 full days after I dropped the hammer. I imagined him scrambling in California, pacing the floor of his hotel room, trying to figure out how to salvage his shattered ego. But I didn't have to imagine the details for long. My legal team had kept our private investigator on retainer to track the offshore accounts Julian had tried to hide. When the investigator walked into my office and handed me his final report, the sheer irony of it almost made me laugh out loud. I learned exactly what Julian did the moment our phone call ended. He had panicked. Once he realized I had legally locked him out of the $1.2 million LLC fund and stripped his CEO title, he knew his primary payday was gone. But he still had his backup plan. He still had Victoria, and he still had the hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal cash he'd been quietly siphoning off for months. They had pooled that money into a private offshore account, ready to fund their glamorous new life in Silicon Valley. He just needed to reach her. He needed her to wire him emergency funds. He dialed her number. It went straight to a generic voicemail. He texted her. Delivered, but not read. He called her 10, 20 times in a row. Nothing but dead air. Frantic, Julian jumped into his rental car and sped across town to the address she had given him for her prestigious venture capital firm. He stormed into the corporate lobby, demanding to see her. The receptionist just stared at him in utter confusion. There was no venture capital firm by that name in the building. The suite number Victoria had printed on her glossy business cards belonged to a vacant storage closet on the 4th floor. His chest must have been tight, his breath shallow. He drove to the luxury estate in Atherton, the multi-million-dollar house she claimed she was in the middle of closing on for them. The house was real, but the real estate agent standing in the driveway had never heard the name Victoria in her life. My investigator's report spelled it out in black and white. Victoria was never an investor. She didn't manage a venture fund. She was a professional, highly skilled grifter. She targeted arrogant, greedy men who thought they were the smartest people in the room. She had played Julian perfectly. She promised him a life of high society, stroked his massive ego, and convinced him to wire every single dollar of his personal savings into an account she completely controlled. The moment Julian's plane took off from Phoenix, Victoria had emptied the offshore account, closed her burner phone, and vanished without a trace. She was a ghost. Julian went from a self-proclaimed financial genius to a penniless mark in a matter of hours. The predator had just been eaten alive. On the fourth day, my phone rang. It was an unknown California number. I let it go to voicemail, watching the red light blink on my desk. When I finally pressed play, I almost didn't recognize the voice on the recording. It was weak, shaking, completely broken. "Elena, please," the voice whispered, cracking under the weight of utter defeat. "I have nothing. She took it all. My credit cards are declining. I can't even pay for the hotel room tonight. Please, I know I messed up, but you have to help me. I am your husband." I sat in my office, looking out at the red rocks of Sedona, listening to the man who had meticulously planned to leave me bankrupt in the desert. He was stranded, penniless, and drowning in the massive debts he took out to fund his secret double life. He actually thought I would be his safety net again. He thought the woman he tried to destroy would reach out and save him from his own greed. I didn't delete the voicemail. I forwarded it directly to my lawyer to add to the permanent divorce file. Then I blocked the number. When a thief steals from a thief, there is no tragedy. There is just the bill finally coming due. With Julian permanently out of the picture and the legal battle finally settled, the dust in Sedona began to clear. I had the land. I had the remaining LLC funds. It was time to finish building the eco-resort. But this time, it was going to be on my own terms. To help me redesign the project, I brought in Liam, the brilliant lead architect I had worked with before Julian restricted our budget. Liam was everything Julian wasn't. He was quiet, respectful, and actually listened when I spoke. I thought the hardest part was over. I really believed that once the divorce decree was signed, I would just pop open a bottle of champagne, snap my fingers, and everything would magically fall into place. I was wrong. People look at women who walk away from toxic marriages and they say, "Wow, she's so strong, she is living her best life now." They only see the victory. They don't see the grueling, messy reality that comes right after. The freedom I fought so hard for came with a very bitter aftertaste. Without Julian managing the logistics, the massive weight of running the entire operation fell completely on my shoulders. I wasn't just sketching beautiful blueprints anymore. I was suddenly dealing with aggressive supply vendors, navigating endless zoning permits with the county, and trying to decipher the absolute mess Julian had made of our tax records. There were mornings I had to be on site at 4:30 a.m. to accept lumber deliveries in the freezing desert air. There were afternoons where the plumbing contractors threatened to walk off the job because of a dispute Julian had caused months ago, and I had to stand my ground, negotiating contracts I barely understood. I remember one specific evening, sitting alone in the partially finished main lodge. The power had been cut because of a bureaucratic error. The desert night was creeping in, dropping the temperature. I was holding a flashlight over a stack of unpaid invoices from a supplier Julian had secretly ignored. The sheer magnitude of the responsibility crashed down on me. I was exhausted. My hands were blistered. My bank accounts were draining faster than I anticipated. I dropped the flashlight, buried my face in my hands, and just sobbed in the dark. Healing is not a linear, upward path. It is a grueling cycle of taking 2 steps forward and getting knocked 1 step back. You will fall down. You will wonder if you made a mistake. And you will have moments where the silence of an empty house feels entirely deafening. But then, the morning comes. I would drag myself out of bed, wash my face, and drive back to the construction site. Every time I negotiated a new contract, every time I fired a disrespectful vendor, every time I hammered a nail or finalized a permit on my own, I felt myself growing harder, sharper, stronger. Liam watched me go through this entire process. He never tried to take over. He never tried to play the hero. He just stood by my side, handed me the tools I needed, and offered quiet encouragement. "Elena, you have got this," he would say, looking over a complex zoning map with me. "You know this land better than anyone." And he was right. I did know this land. The desert is a harsh environment. It doesn't forgive weakness. But the things that survive here, the things that manage to take root and grow, they are entirely unbreakable. The bitter taste of independence was tough to swallow at first, but the aftertaste? It was absolute freedom, and nobody could ever take that away from me again. It took nearly 3 years before I saw him again. I was standing on the wide wraparound porch of the main lodge, looking out at the property. The equestrian center was full. The yoga pavilions were booked solid, and the desert landscape I had fought so hard for was finally thriving. I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I turned around. It was Julian. He looked completely broken. The sharp, expensive suits were gone. He wore a faded, ill-fitting shirt, his shoulders slumped, his hair thinning and gray at the temples. He looked like a man who had been wandering through the desert without water for years, which, financially speaking, he had. "Elena," he said, his voice hesitant, you did an amazing job with this place. It looks incredible." I leaned against the wooden railing, keeping a safe distance. "Thank you," I said calmly. "What do you want, Julian?" He looked down at his scuffed shoes, taking a deep breath before looking back up at me. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I lost everything, Elena. Victoria cleaned me out. I have been fighting bankruptcy courts and creditors for the last 3 years. I have been sleeping on my brother's couch. I needed to see you. I needed to tell you I am sorry. I know I destroyed our marriage. I listened to his words. I watched his eyes. I waited for that familiar spark of anger or heartbreak to flare up inside me, but there was nothing. Just a profound, heavy silence. "I appreciate the apology," I finally said, "but I think you and I both know you are not really sorry for what you did to me. You are just sorry that you got caught, and that Victoria did to you exactly what you were trying to do to me." His expression hardened instantly. The weak, apologetic facade cracked, and the old Julian, the arrogant, toxic narcissist I used to call my husband, bled right back through. "You think you are so perfect, don't you?" he snapped, his voice turning bitter and sharp. "You ruined me, Elena. If you hadn't freaked out and completely frozen the company accounts, if you had just let the project in San Jose play out, none of this would have happened. I had a plan. We could have been filthy rich. You are the one who pulled the plug and left me with nothing." It was almost fascinating to watch. Even now, completely destroyed by his own greed, he still needed to be the victim. He still needed to blame me for surviving his trap. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him completely unbothered. "I didn't ruin you, Julian," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the desert night. "I just refused to let you ruin me. You built a house of cards, and you are mad at me because I walked out the door before it collapsed on top of you." He stared at me, his chest heaving, his face red with a mix of fury and complete humiliation. He wanted me to scream at him. He wanted me to show him that he still mattered, that he could still elicit some kind of emotional reaction from me. But true closure isn't about getting revenge. It isn't about making the other person understand your pain. It is about reaching a point where their existence simply doesn't affect your pulse anymore. "I don't hate you, Julian," I said softly. "I really don't. Hating you takes energy I would rather spend on my business. Now, please leave my property. My guests are trying to enjoy the sunset." I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned my back to him, walked through the heavy wooden doors of the lodge, and locked them behind me. I didn't look back to see him walk away. I didn't need to. He was officially a ghost. And I was finally, truly alive. Looking back on those grueling first years of rebuilding, I realized something. When my grandfather left me this land, he didn't just leave me dirt and rocks, he left me a foundation. I just had to learn how to stand on it. Well, the eco-resort didn't just survive, it thrived. We expanded the equestrian center. We opened 3 new yoga pavilions that booked out months in advance. The retreat became known across the state as a place of genuine tranquility, a true sanctuary in the middle of the desert. And standing right there with me through every expansion, every late-night planning session, every success, was Liam. He never tried to take over the project. He never asked to put his name on the LLC, and he never once made me feel like my ambition was an inconvenience to him. He was just there, steady, reliable. A quiet strength that didn't demand attention. One evening, after the guests had gone to dinner, Liam and I were sitting on the porch of the main lodge. We were looking out over the canyon, watching the setting sun turn the red rocks into fire. "Elena," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the horizon, "you have built something truly incredible here. You should be so proud." I smiled, taking a sip of my wine. "We built this, Liam," I said. "I couldn't have navigated that first year of construction without you." He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were warm, filled with a kind of respect I had never experienced with Julian. "You would have figured it out," he said softly. "You are the strongest person I have ever met. I am just really glad you let me be a part of it." He didn't make a grand, dramatic declaration of love. He didn't promise me the world or tell me he was going to save me. He just offered me his partnership. We started dating slowly. There was no whirlwind romance, no flashy trips, no attempts to sweep me off my feet. And honestly, that was exactly what I needed. Well, being with Liam taught me what real love actually looks like. It is not about surrendering your independence. It is not about shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's grand plan. True love is like 2 strong trees growing side by side in the desert. Their roots might intertwine deep underground to support each other, but they don't block each other's sunlight. They just stand together, facing the wind. 2 years after Julian walked out of my life, Liam and I got married. It was a tiny private ceremony right here at the resort, under an old cottonwood tree. I didn't change my last name. I didn't merge my business accounts, and Liam never asked me to. Recently, we started hosting specialized retreats for women who are going through divorces, women recovering from financial abuse, women who just need a safe place to breathe and figure out their next steps. During our last retreat, a young woman sat across from me in the lodge, her eyes red from crying. "My husband controls all our money," she whispered, twisting a napkin in her hands. "He says I am not smart enough to handle the investments. I want to leave. But I am so scared. If I walk out that door, I will have absolutely nothing." I looked at her, seeing the ghost of the woman I used to be. I reached out and gently took her hand. "You are smarter than he wants you to believe," I told her firmly. "He controls the money because he knows you are strong enough to leave him if you had it. Do not let him hold the map to your life. Start making your own quiet plan. It will be terrifying. It will be the hardest thing you ever do. But the moment you take your power back, you will realize you never needed him to survive." She looked up at me, a tiny spark of hope finally breaking through her fear. I smiled. "The desert is harsh," I told her, "but you would be amazed at what can bloom here when you finally let the sun in. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped in a marriage where your money, your voice, or your future is being controlled, please listen to me. Do not wait for a savior. Do not ever let anyone hold the map to your life. You have the strength to walk away, and you have every right to take back exactly what is yours. It will be terrifying, but the freedom on the other side is worth the fight. If you know a woman who needs to hear this right now, share this story with her. Remind her that she is not a prisoner. She is just one brave decision away from taking her life back.